following show contains adult content. It's not our intent to offend anyone, but we want to inform you that if you are a child under the age of 18 or get offended easily, this next show may not be for you. The content, opinions, and subject matter of these shows are solely the choice of your show hosts and their guests, and not those of the Entertainment Network or any affiliated stations. Any comments or inquiries should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening.
What's up, Antman?
What's up? How's it going?
It's going. Happy Monday. Monday is the start of everything. Everybody hates Mondays.
Man, people were hating today. I heard Facebook took a today and everybody was like, oh my God, my life is going to burn down. Like,
I know.
I have a bunch of friends that have local businesses, and they rely, I guess I never really thought about it being 2021, how much we really rely on social media. And I mean, rely on social media.
That's the truth of it for sure. And it wasn't just Facebook. It was WhatsApp and Instagram. They were both down, right?
So isn't it crazy? Like, we just did that interview with Mark on Monday, on last week, and about WhatsApp, and we talked about all that stuff. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you guys go to the YouTube channel. It is in there. And then poof. So this is what's happening. I wish we would have had him on this Monday, because of the timing and because of, I
know we definitely could have blown it up with that, because everybody's like, F Facebook, right? F it.
Right. Yeah.
Let's try something new.
Right.
Well, here's your chance. Check out last week's episode and get on that WhatsApp train, because it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, everything Facebook owned went down today. It is absolutely correct. So if you guys haven't seen tonight, we have somebody very, very special with us tonight. Mr. Randy Edelman is going to be hanging out with us. And, due to time constraints and time zones, we are getting ready to get together. But in the meantime, we are hanging out here live with you. And hopefully you guys are getting out there and checking out some cool stuff in the works in our communities. I know a lot of the communities are doing new projects to try to get everybody engaged again.
Yeah, and what better time than the fall, when all the seasons are starting to change, when it's fall, Thanksgiving, Christmas comes up, and it's definitely a time of gathering and creating and making things happen, magic happen, right?
Are you a pumpkin spice chick, Roxy?
No.
Wait,
hell no. Don't come at me with no pumpkin spice stuff.
That's great. What is your holiday flavor?
Do
you have one?
I like pineapple ham. I like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I like meats and stuff. I don't like sweets. I'm not a sweetie.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I figured, So are you a turkey on Christmas or a ham on Christmas?
I've never been a big fan of turkey, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Right. What about you?
I'm Italian and Irish, so it's like, put it on the plate, baby. I got you. Like, whatever. Hey.
What's up? Mike's in the house. Hey. Got some chaos ritual coming up.
Yes, we do. That is finally Friday. Yeah. Let's see. Looks like, are we having video technically?
Not yet. Not yet.
All right, cool. So I put that little video together for the show. And And so when I put it together, like I went to his website, I went to like everything, all kinds of platforms just to see. And at the end of the day, I fell on this copyright free instrumental that was like epic. It was just like, action movie composer worthy. After listening to some of the scores that Randy's put together, listening to that, putting that together, I was sitting on my couch and I put my earbuds in because I like to edit with my headphones on, or the best opportunity to hear it the best. And I put that music on and I sat straight up and I looked over, and Mazikine, my daughter, sitting there, and she goes, "Daddy, I like it."
Oh, you got his approval
So,
from
yeah,
a
so
genuine, like, that's awesome.
yeah, so I put that together, and she was like, "Daddy," because I have a whole folder of a bunch of stuff I've just been goofing around with for the show and for everything else. And she was like, "Daddy," and I was messing around making the logo spin around and stuff, and she was like, "Daddy, do that. No, that color, that color." So we got a whole bunch of stuff
We're
coming, courtesy of my daughter.
nice. We're gonna have to show that to Randy, because the influence of your little girl was so phenomenal. Definitely. I
Yeah.
have to answer a quick question here with Teresa. That's a definite yes. I definitely engineer that show as well. Uh, that's awesome of you to put those two together. Thanks for being here.
That's
All
cool.
right, so Randy is in the house. Randy Edelman. So let's talk a little bit about him real quick and all the phenomenal things that he's done because he is absolutely amazing.
Well, I can't speak enough about him. First and foremost, being a kid of the 80s, I could go down the list. I really, really could. But all I'm going to say is that Ghostbusters 2 is one of my favorites all time of my childhood. I feel honored and privileged to be able to even share some virtual space with this man. And if you haven't got a chance to check him out, you need to go over to randyedelman.com right now. School yourself and prepare yourself for this awesomeness that is Mr. Randy Edelman.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to welcome Randy to the show.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and
Good.
clear.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Great. First and foremost, thank you so much for taking time to come spend this evening with us. I know you're a busy man.
My pleasure. My pleasure. As long as you can get beyond Ghostbusters 2.
I can. Oh, I can. I can. That's just the earliest that I can remember, like really remember.
What
So,
I'm hung up on is Last of Mohicans because that one has just been that was instilled in me at an early age, and then you go
Yep.
beyond that. You're still going strong. Let us know what you're up to these days.
Well, I'm up to a lot of different stuff. I never talk about the films I'm doing when I'm doing them because it's just I just don't ever talk about them till they are done and they come out. But I'm here because after all these years, when I had stopped producing my own albums and writing songs and got into film scoring, that's a completely different animal. I over the last year was screwing around with some songs and wrote this single called Coming Out the Other Side. And that's probably why I'm with you today, even though there's not that much to talk about, other than it's a kind of a really fun, there's a little message in there about getting out, when what was supposedly getting out after all this being locked inside and being able to go out again and do everything we were doing. So but it's a fun thing. It's not like a serious message song. And that's one of the things that I've been doing after years and years of, as I said, not writing songs. And I never, ever write a song for any movie I'm doing because that's my job. I have a different job when I'm scoring a film. It's not about songs. It's about, making whatever vision the director has of making those scenes that need musical support kind of live. So that's that. I'm ready. I'm ready for you.
It's
I mean, I
awesome.
can, you want, I mean, I can go on for many, many, many hours, but you don't want to hear that. So I'll just jump in with you guys. Tell me what you're interested in about.
Wow. Where to start?
I
Roxy, ladies first.
we're in the development of things, lots of things have been changing lately, right? A lot of things have been virtual, so we're kind of trying to build a community and make not make everybody, but
Okay,
help
no, I'm
everybody.
very listen. I'm very interested in what you guys are doing, but I'm really not. I was referring to you asking me questions because I'm here now.
Well, I was leading up to
That's what I
that,
was talking about.
yeah. So I guess my base question with that is, I guess we'll just fast forward and say, hey, what do you have an advice for people who are, you've done so much and conquered so many things, and I'm sure you've had ups and downs with it, as everybody
Of
does,
course.
but
Well, that's like anything else. As far as advice with doing what I do, first you got to besides the normal discipline and if you're a musician, you better be a brilliant, great musician. And how do you get that? That's the old thing. You got to practice. You got to be great. You don't think about scoring films or making albums or forget about that stuff. That's meaningless. First, you have to be great at your craft. If it's playing the trombone, it's playing the trombone. If it's playing the piano, it's playing the piano. First, you got to master that before you can even think about getting into any of this other stuff, at which point you've got to have luck and be in the right place at the right time. But if you are fortunate to get that opportunity, you got to be ready. And the way you get ready is being proficient as a musician in all areas of musicianship, whether it's playing your instrument or knowing theory or orchestration, and all this kinds of stuff prepares you for doing whatever it is. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's doing commercials, whatever opportunity you get, and you obviously in this business don't get it by sitting around and just practicing. You have to put the combination together of hard work and discipline, and then getting your ass out there and hopefully running across somebody who has the need to, in most cases, use your talent. But you don't care about that. Let them use you, and then you can take it to the next step. Hopefully, that's so. As far as advice, that's it. That's it. You know, um, you just got
interesting.
it's you know what? It's no different than any other field. It's just a little crazier, and but very few people get. I consider myself, after all the ups and downs, extremely fortunate and grateful to have been able to um, flourish in all the different areas of music that I just dreamed about. Not specifically, I didn't dream about scoring films or doing, but just dreamed about conducting an orchestra or doing arrangements or accompanying singers, or writing a lyric to a song, all those things. But there was nothing specific. So I just always kind of delved into doing whatever was the opportunity in front of me, and doing the best I could in an emotional sense, and having the passion, whatever it was. It doesn't matter if you write the score to a very silly comedy or a very serious picture like Last of the Mohicans. Um, it's the same work ethic. You have to put the same energy into Jim Carrey or Eddie Murphy or my score to My Cousin Vinny. It was a little movie no one would ever think it would be seen. And these things, or Adam Sandler, any of those things. I mean, I was still the king of comedy for years. And my thing at that point, you're always are striving to do something else. It was to kind of turn my ship around, because I'm not really, you may think I'm funny now, but my music isn't funny. So I had to really work hard after I was very successful and had the opportunity to do more serious movies like Gettysburg, like Mohegans, like Dragonheart, like many things, and kind of show the different sides, hopefully, of the emotion of the music and my themes, that could be adapted to different kinds and styles of films. And that's sort of what I've been doing, for a long time.
Randy, early on, like way back in the Cincinnati days, and I'm going way back.
Whoa,
but
yeah,
you
I
know,
love it.
I wanted
love Cincinnati.
I wanted to ask you. You've been in the game for a long time, and much respect, sir. I've always been fascinated as a kid from the '80s. I've always been fascinated about the idea you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. And looking back at your time, in Cincinnati, from there to now, music's changed a lot. What?
Oh, yeah, yes. It's changed, of course, and the technology has changed. However, music doesn't change. The sound of it changed, the styles of it changed. We could be here all day discussing, the value of hip hop and all the things that's all great. I'm always welcome to that. If I do a film that's a certain style, I will be very true. It's the real deal. I don't like do a contemporary film and then try to bring in the London Symphony. I mean, I do it on certain films, but I've managed to move with the times, and the technology has of course moved on, and the way we do it, the way I work, locked to a picture, it's all digital, and years ago it wasn't like that. Now, I haven't been involved in it that long. Years ago, all a composer had was a piano and a moviola. So how did these guys that wrote all these brilliant scores, you know them, I know them, how did they do that? They didn't have anything to lock. They had a piano and a moviola. How did they show the director what it was going to sound like? These great scores that were written. Well, they had to wait till they got in front of an orchestra in those days. Now it's a lot different because you do mock-ups with all my samplers here, and you can make the stuff sound pretty much, authentic as to what it's going to sound like. If they don't like it in here, they're not going to like it with a 100-piece orchestra. It's just you, and so directors get used to that. But what I have to tell you is, they're still the same notes. There's, other than that, now there's different combinations and different sounds, of course, but it's pretty interesting. That's why I'm glad that I have a very serious conservatory background, which brings me back to, you mentioned Cincinnati. Now you got to understand something. I'm a kid from the concrete jungle, New Jersey, Bergen County. How the fuck did I get out to Cincinnati? That's a book, my friend. How did I become James Brown's arranger at King Records in Cincinnati when I was studying serious classical piano at the Cincinnati Conservatory? Like I said, there's a whole book there. And I didn't realize at the time how insane it was. It was as a result of me bringing kids from the school to play like strings and horns on these crazy recordings that I was doing. And why was the reason I was doing these recordings? Because it always gets back to one thing. And what is that one thing? A girl. It's all about a girl. That's what these things are always about. You say, what does that have to do with what you're saying? Well, there were these rock and roll bands and these little groups called, like, at the Mug Club, these places, reminds me of like Animal House. And I would see these rock and roll groups. And I always loved, even though I was a very serious musician, I always loved pop music and listened to the radio and arrangements and things. And I would see one or two of these girls who were like the lead singers in these like really funky rock and roll bands. And so one day I was practicing the piano somewhere, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this girl sitting in the back of where I was playing. When I got done, I packed up my music and I was walking out, and she looks at me and says, "Boy, you're really good." And I look at her, it's one of the girls from those bands. So what am I going to do? Am I going to let this opportunity slip by? No. So I said, you ought to record one of my songs. Well, I didn't have any songs. I'd never written a song in my life, but I saw my shot with this girl. Boom. There's the connection with James Brown.
Wow.
It's that simple. Now, had that not happened, I don't know. Maybe we wouldn't be talking, but things like that. There's some sort of basic things. So that may be, I may be overstating it, but actually I'm not. I'm actually not even giving you the full story because you don't need to hear that. But it's that simple. And I used the opportunity and started writing songs and doing arrangements. And then, King Records, which was the label, I didn't even know who James Brown was. I'd never heard of James Brown at the time because I liked pop music, but I wasn't. Anyway, that's what happened. And by the time I got out of that school, because what they did is they used to call me. They called the kid from the school who could write these parts for certain instruments. And instead of going at the time to either Memphis, not Nashville, or Chicago, where they were doing lots of recording, they'd call me. He already had his band, the rhythm section. And then I'd bring the kids down, and they give me $100 and I'd write all the parts. And by the time I got out of that school, I went to New York with like a big, like one of those attache cases full of all these tapes and stuff. And that's how I started. I schlepped the stuff into the CBS and played somebody this stuff. And they said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, it's these records that I made that I did the arrangements for." And, that's a little piece of it. And then I started playing on Broadway in the pit of shows. So very quickly, I got going in a lot of these different areas, none of which were the concert pianist area that I thought if I was going to do this, because I was never going to be a teacher in a music school or anything like that. I'm just not good at that and probably not good with people. So right away, I started doing these other things, always very seriously music based. No matter what they were, I was very serious about the music. And then one thing led to another. And that's when the music business changed so that everybody selling records, let's say 99% of the people, wrote, produced, and published their own songs. The old days of the music publisher taking a song to a record producer at a record label who has a bunch of artists on the label they produced. I'll say Frank Sinatra. That may be an obvious example. There are a million other people. Those days were gone. Now the people selling the records, I don't care if it was Bob Dylan or the Beatles or James Taylor or the Eagles or Elton John, they wrote their own songs. So if you had any intention of being a songwriter, guess what? You had to record your own songs.
Yeah.
Well, how do you record a song? I didn't know anything about it. I knew about writing some songs because I'd started doing that. So, but that was that period. So at that time, I always loved to say, if you could write a decent melody and carry a tune, you could get a record deal. And that's exactly what I did. And signed my name to like 100-page contract, no attorney or anything, because I wanted to, and the little backstory of that, going back again to the girl thing, is that this girl, not that same girl, by the way, it was the end of the draft. The Vietnam thing was going down, but there was still that lottery thing. So guess what? I got out of college and I was right in there. So that was a bad thing. I was running around trying to get like excuses from doctors saying I had bronchial asthma or something and trying to get my wheeze going and all that stuff. So what I'm trying to give you a picture, so you get out of school, you're not, don't know what you're going to do. You could be drafted, God forbid. And this was surrounding what was going on with me at the time. So I got dumped by the girlfriend, not that one, a different one. So I was like this basket case. Oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to be drafted. My girlfriend just dumped me. And of course, What happens then is, everybody knows it's such an old cliche. That's when shit happens. So
Yeah.
what did I do? I wrote a bunch of sad songs. Not because I was trying to. I started writing these lyrics. What was I writing about? I don't even have to tell you what I was writing about. I just told you, the gist of my first album. And that's what happened. Maybe without all that stuff happening, I wouldn't have had the impetus to create, whether they were good or bad, those tunes. And that's how I started. And figured I'd do one album, and with this small label, the contract, the 100-page contract. But of course, it didn't turn out like that. But like many other things, at least with me, you do an album. You're a kid. You do an album. What do you want? You want the next day when the album comes out, you want it to like sell 1 million copies. You want to have a hit record. Well, that doesn't happen. That never happens. You could say, what about this and that? Okay, yeah, what about this and that? But there's 1 million other people who got the opportunity but didn't happen to. But other things happened. And, if you want to get into a conversation, what happened is, remember I just told you that no one at the time, 99% of the people selling records were they were their own recording artist, producer. They wrote, they published, blah, blah, blah. But there were a couple of little people who were around who were selling a lot of records. And if you were a songwriter and you weren't an artist or anybody well known, everybody was trying to get those people. There were a handful. And one of them was a couple of young kids, a brother and sister named Karen and Richard Carpenter from Connecticut, who had moved out. I'm telling you, I didn't know any of this then, to California, got a record deal, and had this big hit record, and they were hot. So they were the odd case at the time. It's not like what they were doing was happening. What was happening was the Beatles and the Eagles and James Taylor and Bob Dylan and everybody else that was happening.
Yeah.
So long story short, and there's a long story in there, they got into this album, and the brother, who was actually a very talented guy, I mean, of course, the story about Karen, it's such a tragedy, but Richard was a really good pianist, and he really got into my songs, but he really got into my playing. And before you know it, not only were they recording a couple of tunes from this album that I never thought anybody would hear, but they said, come out with us and be our opening act. Now, here I am. I have never sung in front of my mother or in the shower. I had sung the 10 songs that I wrote and recorded for the album, but that's all I knew. So I went out with them, and, that's, suddenly your life changes a little, because they were huge. We're not talking about concerts. We're talking about concerts at field houses and sporting arenas. That's how big they were. And
Wow.
It was kind of good because, since I hadn't done it before, if you put me in a room and I was sitting in front of the two of you and you said, play these songs, I make you be nervous. But when you're in that arena with the lights and you're miles away from where the audience is actually sitting, you're not really relating to anybody. So you don't get as scared, When I eventually did go into some small clubs after that, I got really nervous. But at those things, I wasn't. So that kind of got my feet wet. And, then I'll jump, and then I'll get off this whole period, or you'll kick me out. So after I did that, must have done that for a couple of weeks, I'd say. And now I'm feeling like, oh, this is nothing. I go out there every night, people clap, I can't see anybody, the lights come on, I do my songs, I leave. So a couple of weeks later, I get a call from one of these big agencies, because once you do a tour like that, you have to be with, an agency. So of course I was with the same agency as Richard and Karen, as the Carpenters were with. And so they called me up, they said, listen, you're in Atlanta. Your next concert with these guys isn't for 4 days. So we got a gig for you tomorrow night. Okay?
Boom.
What do you mean you got a gig? Well, we got a gig for you. You're in Atlanta. You got to be in Dallas next Thursday. We got a gig for you.
Yeah.
what do I do? You do the same damn thing you're doing. Well, guess what? That's all I could do. I couldn't do anything else. But guess what? You know who the act was? The furthest person from the Carpenters. It was Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I schlep off. I go there to Phoenix. To you can imagine. Now, whereas I had been used to walking out and, polite audiences for the Carpenters, even though there were lots of people. And now I'm suddenly with people with horns on their head, throwing shit at me, saying, get off the stage. They weren't. Now, I didn't really care. It was a joke to me. However, I had to do 45 minutes. 45 minutes is a long time to sit out in front of people screaming and yelling at you.
Time. Yeah.
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 And, so that was a whole interesting thing. And at the end of the first concert, it was like in Phoenix. And when I got done, I wish I could tell you the story because it's a riot. It had a revolving stage, but it's a very famous place called the Celebrity Theater in Phoenix. I think it's still there. But you got to understand, the stage revolves so slow, you don't know it. And when you're not looking up, because I never, ever looked up, I was surrounded by his speakers and the audience was screaming and yelling. So I just looked at my watch, did my 45 minutes. And what did I do? Well, like if I'm standing like I'm here now at the piano, what do? You walked out this way. So I turned around and walked out the same way that I came on. But guess what? The thing had turned. I wasn't in the place. So therefore, there was no place to go, quote, backstage. That's only one place. And if that thing had turned here, you had to wait till it went around. Anyway, of course, the audience got hip because here I am standing. I'm not done with my thing. They're screaming and yelling at me anyway and laughing. So I jumped off the side of the stage. I walked up the aisle, got a hot dog, and took the first plane out of Phoenix, which went to like San Francisco.
Wow.
Because I just had to get out of there. Yeah. Never thinking, of course, that I'd hear from anybody again. Well, of course, wouldn't you know it, a day or two later, they call and say, okay, Zappa wants you in, Nashville in, 4 days. It's like, what? Didn't he see what went on? Of course he didn't. He wasn't looking. He was backstage doing whatever he does, backstage, whatever that was, So that was an interesting experience that I had that, of course, and like I said, I was a serious classical musician with no idea about any of this. And I obviously, in a short time, really got my feet wet in a bunch of different things. But as far as loving writing songs or doing the albums I was doing, it was a little different than where I thought I'd be musically. However, I loved it. And I loved making the records and doing the arrangements and the orchestrations and writing lyrics. And so that kind of went on. And other people started recording my songs, even though my albums never really happened. It turns out was a fantastic thing, or I could never, ever be doing what I ended up doing, scoring films, because you can't do that. You have one little teeny bopper hit record, and that's who you are.
My grandparents loved Weekend in New England, for the record. That was my grandparents, one of their favorite songs.
Another, you want to hear that story quickly?
Of course.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, all right. So I just told you, I gave you the background. Now so people did the song. Now this is before, because what you just said, that song obviously was a big deal because it was a big hit by a hot artist. And I hadn't had a hit single. People had recorded the songs. I had recorded them. So on my fourth album, now that's a lot of albums. It's like if you're a film director and you direct a couple of duds, that doesn't mean the pictures aren't brilliant, but they just don't do business. Okay. So I was a guy, but I had respect because of my musicianship and because people had recorded the songs, and everybody always loved my albums, but I just couldn't get what you had to get that time. You had to get simple, a hit single. Just didn't seem to happen. Lo and behold, so I do my fourth album. The album comes out here, a few blocks away from where I'm sitting now. I wasn't sitting here then, but sitting, close by. And the album comes out, and once again, they look for like the most commercial sounding cut, and they release this terrible song, that I had written because I was trying to get a hit single. And after a month or two of that, I figured, okay, that's it. It's over now. I've done 4 albums. I'm not going to get another shot. And lo and behold, in London, there's only one place, especially at that time, you could break records. It's called BBC. Actually, there's a couple of BBC stations, but it's BBC One, the big pop station. But at that time, there was these pirate stations in England, offshore. They were called pirate stations. But they finally got one in the city called Capital Radio. And Capital Radio somehow got a hold of that 4th album, the one I thought was going to be, that's it. And to make a long story short, literally, they called me a couple of weeks later after they forced the label that released my albums in England to release this thing as a single. And they said, hey, your record sold 2,000 copies in London. And the next day was 3. And in a couple of weeks, it was a big hit. And I went over and did a show called Top of the Pops. You can't do Top of the Pops. It doesn't matter who you are. You have to be like in the top 10. Or you can't. It doesn't matter if you're Paul McCartney. If you're in the top 10, you do it. But if you're not. So I go in there and do Top of the Pops. So now I'm like flying. It's almost good because I had waited around a little. I had done 4 albums and figured I was dead. And out of left field, just when I thought you better think about doing something else other than these albums and songs, I go back to my hotel. I was high. I wasn't on drugs. It was just the whole thing was crazy.
Yeah.
That I had this. It was a big hit. It wasn't some little turn. It was a massive commercial hit. And I get back to the hotel. And by the way, on that first show I did, I met a group of kids from Sweden who just won something called the Eurovision Song Contest. I'd never heard of them. Their name was ABBA. Okay. Another story is going to go with that, which you won't hear now. There was, oh my God, there were fantastic people on that week, So I go back to the hotel, and this is like a story. I go back, I'm feeling great. I'm going to go out to dinner, and the phone rings. And it's somebody who works for a company, and suddenly they say, is this you? Yeah. Clive Davis is on the phone. I mean, it's like, now at the time he hadn't become as well known as he became, but he was still a big shot. Had this company called Aris, and it just broken big time. This guy, Barry Manilow, who I know, Barry, he's from Brooklyn. He wrote commercials. I knew him when I was in New York when I was first starting out. It wasn't like some cool character, but he had broken him, and he did some really wonderful commercial records. And he says, getting back to what you just said about your mother or your grandmother, I don't want to say your grandmother. He says, you have this song on this album. This was an album that had the big hit single on it that I'm talking about in London, but it wasn't that. That was a song, Weekend New England, that the record company that released that 4th album of mine tried to get off the album. You're supposed to have 10 songs. This was the 11th song. It was kind of a ballad, but it had jazzy chord changes, and it was the most uncommercial thing if you were a record executive. So they tried to get me to take it off the album. That's a little backstory about this song, but I was able to keep it on. So Clive Davis gets on the phone. I have to give him credit. He says, you have this song, and it's got this wonderful hook, which is what they always used to call the chorus of the song. He said, but the other part of the song is not, he didn't know, he's not a musician. He maybe said it's not really commercially accessible. Now, the truth is, he was absolutely right. However, so what did he want me to do? He wanted me to change it. Well, suddenly I'm in London. I have a big hit record. I've been around. It's like, I don't care who you are. Screw you. I'm not changing my song. However, I didn't say that. And I said, well, he said, well, we're leaving tomorrow and blah, blah, blah. If you could think about it, and believe me, at that time, as he was talking, it was like in one ear, out the other. I wasn't thinking like, ooh, it would be really good if Barry Manilow recorded this. Yeah, I was just thinking, okay, I'm going to get off the phone. So got off the phone. I promised him I'd consider what he said, because I'd been through enough stuff to know I've heard a lot of this stuff. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
Especially with this guy in this kind of story. So I went to dinner and I got back and I thought about what he said. And the only reason I did it was if it had been any other song, and somebody wanted me to change it, I really wouldn't have done it. But what he had said about this particular song was completely true. It was a very odd chord progression and song until you got to the big, when will our eyes meet? When can I touch you? The big commercial chorus. So I called downstairs and I said, is the bar open? They said, no, just closed. I knew they had a little piano in there. And I went, and I'd say in about, I'm not saying this to make you think I'm some genius, because I'm not, but I'd say no longer than 15 minutes, because I wasn't in the mood, really. I wasn't going to sit down there and spend a lot of time. So I quickly made the verses actually very similar as far as the chord progressions, not the melody, to the chorus. And it just became this very simple thing. I jotted down some little notes, not even on a piece of music paper, just on regular paper. I got up in the morning and went into a studio with a piano. I didn't even overdub my voice. I sang this new thing live. God was turned the mic on, sang it. He made a cassette or something. I didn't even take it. And somebody came from Clive's hotel and picked up this cassette. I left there, and I'm telling you, it wasn't like, oh, I did this thing. I never really thought about it again, because I did it, but it wasn't. And of course, I didn't really like what I did at all. I liked my version of the song because there was a kind of reason for writing the song and a style. All I can tell you is within a couple of weeks, Barry Manilow had recorded it. I went back from England. I did that a couple of shows. I went back to New York and went up to Clive's office. Now he wants to sign me as an artist. Now, I was already in England and I had a hit record. However, the record company, luckily they never broke that record in the United States. So it looked bad. So what he said is, look, go to these people, give them your sob story. And I understand that there's stuff going on with you, and we'll get involved and record you'll record for Arista, and the rest of the world you'll still be on the other label. Now, nobody knew if this could happen, but it was like a low-key thing. It wasn't a big deal. And since nothing happened with my record in the United States, I did the sob story to the guy, the head of the record label that I was with here, and I got out of it, and I was suddenly with Clive. And so the end of the Weekend New England story is, so I go to Clive's office. He tells me he wants to do this. I said, okay, I'll try to do it, because I'm only going to be better off here having you release my records. And then he says, okay. And of course, he closes the door, and you know what he's going to do. He is going to play me for the first time ever, Barry Manilow, singing my song Weekend New England. But guess what he's singing? What do you think he's singing? He's singing exactly what I did, rewrote in 15 minutes in the hotel, and recorded that next morning in the little studio in Soho in London. Exactly. Only it's blown out of all proportion because it's a full, big Barry Manilow chorus hit ballad. So when you listen to that the first time, I had never listened to what I did. Again, I did it. I sent a cassette to the hotel. I never kept anything. I didn't have a cassette, and I never heard it again. So it was kind of off-putting when he played it to me. Now, what was I going to do? You know, he was so excited, and everybody was coming in from their offices and saying this is a big hit. And so I'm just sitting there listening to this full-blown version of a song that I had lived with for a couple of years a certain way, and that's what I recorded on my album. But this was totally different. But I must say, I did everything. It's exactly what I did to change it. Barry did nothing but take what I had written, and Clive wanted it like that. And and then of course it became a big hit. That's the end of that story. That takes us to 1970. What year is it? 2021. Anyway, so that you got a little piece of my early history before any of this stuff with what I've done for the last, ages.
So fascinating. So let's touch base on coming out the other side then.
Well, okay, well that's like I can't even think about that. So after that period, I did albums for Clive, but they did not happen, as I told you before. Thank God. And they didn't happen in England. So my career, I did an album for Rocket Records that was Elton John's label. I went to Sweden eventually because ABBA, from the first day I met them, were big fans of mine. So guess what? Years later, they called me and said, we've got the best studio in the world. And I went to Stockholm. That's where my recording career, I thought, ended. I went to Stockholm. My next stop was going to be like Siberia. You know what I mean? I did 6 albums in the United States, then one for Elton John in London, then one for ABBA in Sweden. And my next stop was like Russia. That's when I stopped. And I said, you know what? You did this. Now you're going to use some of this, hopefully, talent and ability and all the stuff you've learned over the years musically and serious to get into something else. Now, you don't just do that. It's not like you snap your fingers. Years and years of doing other things led me to the same thing, getting back to what I said, an opportunity, a strange opportunity. And you may say, well, nothing would be strange. Look at all the stuff you did. And I'm not telling you anything, but you still have to have that magic thing. And as far as in big time feature films, mine came with a director named Ivan Reitman, not Ghostbusters 2. It was a movie called Twins.
Yep.
And I was brought in only to write music for one character, Danny DeVito's, who played this kind of scumbag brother of this brilliant guy. Twins is a very, very sweet, warm movie. It really is. Yeah. And that's how it started. Of course, it became much more than that. And I ended up, it's a long story. I became early on, it wasn't early on, I wasn't a kid, but luckily nobody really, even though I had done all this stuff, they didn't know me. I was like this new guy in town. I looked, luckily, much younger than I actually was. And I still do now, hopefully. But so I was just like, the directors and people I wrote, they didn't know I had written all these songs or done all these albums, and they didn't care because that wasn't my thing. So that's how it kind of got started, and doing all those things with Ivan, Kindergarten Cop, Ghostbusters 2, all the little Beethoven movies about the Shaggy Dog, until I was able, and then of course I did smaller pictures, which are classics now, like The Mask with Jim Carrey, and My Cousin Vinny with Joe Pesci, and While You Were Sleeping with Sandra Bullock. So I was like just all over the place, basically doing serious scores for comedies. It's not like if you listen to the music, you know, there's different kinds of comedies. Comedies have action in them. They have romance. They have dark, you know. So until I kind of was able to do some other kinds of things like Gettysburg, like Mohegans, like Dragonheart, and lots of other things, you know. So that's, you know, that's the long and short. But it wasn't like I just snapped my fingers after the I call it the ABBA, the Swedish experience. Um, and I said, I want to score movies. There was a little show that I did a pilot for about a guy who could build a bomb out of a chocolate bar. Everybody hated it. It was called MacGyver. Little did I ever know that thing, I wrote that theme, and that thing was gonna. It's still on. I'm talking about my thing. They actually made a new show in the last couple of years. It's not on, but you know, I got my feet wet having to write like hours of music overnight, which was a horrible experience. So, but those things work to your advantage. So there was lots of stuff I did before I got that little break.
Randy, what you know, the whole course of everything that you've done, you've been through, what is your favorite musical composition? And to you, what makes it so good?
Okay, as far as mine, you mean?
Yes, that you've
See,
done so far.
I know, but you know what? I'll tell you honestly. I wish. I mean, I wish I could give you an answer. I don't. I I approach all of them with the same serious intent, like I told you before. Now, I could tell you what's my favorite. Listen to the main title of Gettysburg that has now replaced all the 1812 on the 4th of July and Memorial Day, all the symphony orchestras. Now they play my piece. They play Gettysburg. It's just boom. As soon as you hear the first notes and the sound of it, yeah. But is that my favorite thing? Probably not. Um, there's other pieces within scores that musically I'm proudest of because they're original. They have a certain uniqueness as far as melodically and harmonically and in the orchestration. Um, but what happens is each time you do a score and you do a movie, you're suddenly part of the composer is the last person into a movie. Now, these movies, I don't care what they are or how good or bad they are, they have long, long histories. They're not just some thing that somebody came up with an idea 6 months ago and then they got a movie made. Most movies that are greenlit by even the studios, they never get made. Okay. So all these pictures, some of them have like, if I told you like about a silly Adam Sandler film and it's got a 20-year history, you go, how's that possible? It's just some silly film that no, somebody wrote it years ago based on something. They had somebody at the time to star in it, but he backed out or she backed out. And then it went to and turn around to a different studio and dun, 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 dun. And then years later, there's this guy that comes on a show called Saturday Night Live and he sings the Hanukkah song or whatever it is. And somebody related to that old idea gets, so it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be a serious thing. And when I work on those pictures, I work as hard as I do on that as I do on Last of the Mohegans. And depending on what kind of experience it is with the director and how it turned out, and for me, how a picture turns out has nothing to do with how many people know it or went to see it at the box office. It has to do with, did I make an important contribution that only the score can make? And did they use the music the way I intended it to be? That may sound funny. See, when I'm done recording the music, I'm not putting it in the picture. I put it in the picture here. I write it to the picture. Every cue is locked where it goes. But once they take it to the final mix, which is on the soundstage with sound effects, with dialogue, with music, they can screw around with it so much so that it just tears your heart out. So I always say, you know what? If 75% of the music, and I write like 40, 50, 60 cues, those are starts when each time the music starts. If I get 75 or 80%, and that's leaving out a lot, 20% or something, then I'm happy. That's a good experience. Sometimes you get 90%. Sometimes they take the music and completely change it around. Director hears a piece that you wrote in the fourth reel for a scene, and you know what he decides? You go to the premiere, and all of a sudden the picture opens, and guess what the opening music is? That music. That's how drastic. That's drastic. But it happens. So that's how I tend to view these things. So I may tell you about something that I thought was great, but if they you know, changed and got very experimental with my score, then I don't think about that music the same way as I did necessarily when I was actually composing it. So it sounds crazy, but that's why Leonard Bernstein only wrote one score. That's it. He said never. He wrote musicals, but he never wrote another film score. He did a picture called On the Waterfront. Great picture, great score, but they screwed around with his music, and he never got over it. He would not ever talk to anybody else.
Wow.
Best composer, one of the best composers of this century. And he was into all kinds of things, obviously, but he wouldn't do that again because he wouldn't. He wasn't in that collaborative state. That it's funny. It's a collaborative medium, writing music for films, but you really do it when I'm out here at 3 a.m. and no one's here. That's when you look at a scene and maybe you'll come up with something really good, original, unique that fits the character in the scene, not with 12 people, the producers and director coming over here screaming in my ear and having me listen to their temp score, which is a whole other story, which you have to deal with because every movie is completely scored before you ever see a frame. And that's the music they live with. And so then you have to get them off the mood of that, which they've spent years on. That's another discussion. I think I've completely gone over my time with you guys.
You did. We've enjoyed your fascinating story.
But you know what? Like, it is
Okay.
completely all right. I really appreciate you having the time to come spend with us tonight, Randy. Before we let you go, though, I wanted to ask you, what would you say to artists or musicians or people out there in the music industry today? What piece of advice would you leave them with if they were going to see this interview and say, hey, I want to do that?
Well, but I told you it's the exact same. I mean, if you played it back, it's what I told you at the beginning. There is no advice. The advice is you've got to be a great musician. You're not a film composer or a commercial composer, or you're a composer, and you better get your chops together in every possible area so that if you're fortunate enough to get an opportunity, any opportunity, you may think, look at Danny Elfman and Tim Burton. That Tim Burton's this young kid, a talented cartoonist working at Walt Disney Studios, but he's a fan of a group called Oingo Boingo. And when he gets a chance, this is years ago, some people don't even know this,
Yeah.
to do a film called Pee-wee's Adventure, whatever that was, who the hell does he call to do the score? This guitar player in Oingo Boingo. That's nuts. Guess what? It wasn't at all. And there you have a brilliant collaboration for years, whether you love it or blah, blah, blah. And so what I'm saying is that opportunity came for both of them because they're both mutual, they both obviously creatively got something out of it. Danny on his end and Tim Burton on his end. But it came from something that may be, that's a big example. But there may be something else that's not as, out as that. But that you have to be ready. So what I tell anybody is you have to have your musical chops. Together. You're playing your orchestra, every end of it. And of course, now with the technology, I won't get into people, or obviously half of the people composing music, they don't even know how to read music. But that's not what I'm talking about. If you're coming at it from an electronic way or a synthesized way, which is fine, because that's what things have evolved to, you still have to get that end of the playing together. It doesn't matter what keyboard you're playing. Well, everything is one little keyboard now that goes into a box with a billion things in it. But you still have to have that musical end together, and the soul and the heart and the passion to be able to look at something and you come up with something totally unique that shows, your forte and what you are like as a musician, and can make that shine. And if it shines and makes a director's visual image shine and take it to a different level, guess what? You're on the ground floor.
Speaking of something new, you have something new. I have a feeling. Some
I
music, maybe.
Well, I always have new stuff, but I don't talk about what I'm doing.
With a shot.
Oh, you still want that again? No.
No.
Hey, listen. We didn't get into it. I'm going to let you go. There is something new, and you know what it is? Why did Sony Classical, the most prestigious and best label, not just for classical music, they do very few film scores. Why did they, for the first time, just release my huge orchestra score to Ghostbusters 2? Why? It's never been out before. It's 30 years. That I'll leave you with.
It is definitely something to ponder on for sure. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
if you get their press release, you see a little bit of it, and
Check it
there's
out.
it's a political, it's a lots of stuff. It's not like I've been sitting there for 30 years. No, I didn't even think about it. But and then I went to find the scores, and they had lost half of them. Unbelievable. How could you lose
Wow.
it? So the story begins there. We'll do a whole thing on that.
Wow.
We'll do a thing on that, and then the book on the Cincinnati and the girls in the rock and roll bands.
Ooh, we'd love to have you back. Your stories are
love that.
fascinating. You're inspiring. I really enjoyed seeing you part of the 9/11 with Soho Johnny. That was amazing. So
did you see that?
Yes.
How? Were you there?
Well, Instagram photos and things. I wanted to be there.
You can't you know what? You can't even imagine what it was. And 5 seconds before I went on, I said to somebody, I can't do this. I'm not going to get up there because the situation's not right. They couldn't put the piano on the stage because the guys weren't allowed to move it or lift it. And plus the whole scene, it was crazy. And so I said to somebody, I'm going to go. I'm going to sing 2 up-tempo, silly songs. And I had this whole kind of, not serious thing. I had an idea of what I was going to do, but I knew it wasn't the right situation. And then somebody came up to me and they said, hey, you know what? It's 9/11. We're a few blocks from ground zero. And then I said to myself, you know what? Go ahead, do your thing. And I went and I did it, and it worked out. That I don't know how the people got quiet. I just don't even know how it happened, but it turned out okay. But you sort of had to have been there to see the whole evening, and nobody I know was there that I know. No people I know, friends or people in the business or anything. Nobody was there, and so I had to tell people. But even if you see it, I mean, somebody I guess had a phone or a camera. You can't imagine that. It was really something.
Yeah. Wow, impressive. We really gotta cut it. The show. We're a little over,
Cut
but
it, baby. Cut it.
we
All right.
really appreciate you being on the show. Make
Thanks,
sure everybody
guys.
go check him out. At randyedelman.com.
That's it.
All
All right.
right. Until
Man.
next week, everybody tune in for Drumagon. So great stuff happening. See you next
Okay.
week on RA Nation.
Stay safe.
You guys.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Randy.
Bye.